Okay, so we've been discussing on the three principles of the path. Um, and so moving on from the Mahayana, not that we have moved on from it, but just from understanding standpoint, the third principle is the wisdom that knows emptiness. Now that's my own translation, because the wisdom that knows emptiness is not intellectual, should not be intellectual. If it's intellectual, then it kind of floats in and out. It's not very powerful. It can be intellectual. We first start to hear about it and understand it, but we need to integrate it, and we need to integrate it within our meditation, and then our mind becomes oneness with that wisdom that understands emptiness. So, what is emptiness? What are we talking about with it? This is always, very important point to understand, because within the Buddhist path, Buddha's teaching the middle way. So he's not teaching a nihilistic approach, which is there is nothing, everything is empty, there is nothing that exists, or what we stay in most of the time, which is things are really solidly extremes, the opposite end of that. So we need to understand emptiness and understand that everything that we deal with, everything we come in contact with throughout the day, I guess the best word in Buddhists, they would talk about dharmas, phenomena, things, anything, whatever thoughts, we're meditating, whatever feelings, whatever comes about. The chair, a table, these things all exist two ways. That's what's understood by absolute truth and conventional truth, relative truth. So the conventional truth is that we have a couch, we have a table. But if we look for where the couch, where the table is, there's no absolute table sitting there, in the sense that it's always a table, it's always been a table. It's independent of anything. It's not dependent. The chair, the table, the couch are all dependent on all of its parts, and then being put into a use, into a conventional use, we call that a couch. If we lay down at night, we can call it a bed. Because there is nothing inherent in here that's couchness, and that's all that it is. It's empty of that inherent existence. So when our mind grasps, and here's where the problem lies, we're basically dealing with the world through our senses, through our eyes, through our hearing, through our taste, through our touch. We're outward rather than looking inward. So when our eyes see something, it sees it, the eye consciousness sees this couch, and then becomes a whole story, whole commentary. Oh yeah, that's a couch. I had one like that before. It's not that comfortable. It was that comfortable. Whatever the stories are, there's a whole bunch that goes with it. But what happens is that we immediately grasp that as a reality, as a solid thing in itself, not dependent. So, not dependent means that it can only exist on its own. And so when science looks and gets into atoms and neutrons, you keep breaking them up, they keep getting smaller and smaller, they've come to the same conclusion and found out that there is nothing there. So what is taking place, really, is that our mind, our stream of consciousness, continuously is aware, has awareness. When it's clearly aware, it's wisdom. When it knows wrongly, when it perceives in the wrong way, when it distorts, then that becomes what's known as the delusions, the emotions. And so the root of not knowing in Tibetan is what's called marikpa. We hear the word rikpa, rikpa. Rikpa is awareness. Rikpa is knowing. That's the function. If we look inside of ourselves, we find that the function of our mind is to know. When it knows wrongly, then we label things, we grasp at them, and so when not knowing manifests in the way of attachment, it becomes desire and grasping. When knowing wrongly manifests in anger or hatred, we lash out. And that's where the karma comes in. That's where that's where our suffering, our pain comes from, because we know wrongly. Because the mind is not in rikpa. So I'm not going to go into many details. Rikpa is understood slightly different in sutra teachings as opposed to what happens later on, especially in Tantra and Dzogchen and others. But basically the rikpa, the knowing, is knowing wrongly. It's become distorted. So because it's become distorted, it's not seeing what's there, it's seeing something else. It's seeing some projection. And these projections come from our years and years of continuously not looking inward and looking at the looker, looking at the one who's seeing, but looking at the world outside and trying to grasp after what one likes and reject what one doesn't like and just ignore something that hasn't been made a decision for. And if we go on, same thing happens with us when we begin to experience different energy of things, when we have pride, for example. So when we have pride, our mind, the knowing, begins to know wrongly, starts to think, oh, well, I'm actually better than these other people. So because I'm better than them and they're lower than me, then I feel proud. So I sit in a meeting, and while I sit in that meeting, I don't really want to listen to these other people because they don't have anything to add. And they look at me and they think, oh, look at him. He has such a big ego. Well, we need to understand, okay, I don't mean to veer off here for a second. That aspect of is only one little aspect of ego. That's like taking a hair that fell off of an elephant and trying to understand what is an elephant. Ego in Buddhist terms, understanding non-ego, no ego grasping, is much greater. Pride is only one aspect, one little small aspect of what we call ego. So this pride that's there, and pride in itself is not something that's bad. Even in the Vajrayana practices, Tantra practices, through the wisdom of emptiness, when one rises oneself as a deity, you associate yourself with your Buddha nature through that deity, and that's Vajra pride. So distorted pride and Vajra pride are very, very different. So we have this not knowing which arises through different ways. We can also, from jealousy. So we have the base, the root, which is marikpa, ignorance, not knowing wrongly. And based off of that, the branches of our delusions, which is anger, hatred, desire, attachment, jealousy, pride. This is what we end up dealing with. So when we begin to want to develop the understanding, the wisdom, recognizing our real nature and recognizing the emptiness. So there's generally they talk two forms of emptiness. Emptiness of others, so that's with every phenomena outside oneself. And then there's emptiness of self. So that's the ego, in a sense. So it becomes very, very important for us to begin to go in and see, what am I? Who am I? Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa, continuously their mantra, when we're at Kopan, when they're all these years, check up, check up, check up. Because we need to look inside. We need to look inside. What is it? What is it that we're negating? What is it that something's empty of? It's empty of this wrong view. It's empty of this wrong concept. The main wrong concept about ourself creates this spider web, this incredible web of all these different types of energies that go on, from delusion and hatred and desire, and it basically engulfs us within this. So in order to recognize what it's empty of, we have to know what we think. We think we know who we are, but then we sit there and think for a second, wait a minute, I don't know who I am. But then if we really start to look, we say, well, yeah, I like my coffee exactly that way. I like my tea exactly that way. I like this, I like that, I. There's a very, very solid feeling of I, and what I want out there is also very, very solid. But it's not. It's not that the world is an illusion. It's that things are illusory because they appear as something that they're not. This is the main mistake. So when we go in and we begin to recognize what we think, where is the home base that everything reports back to, that every feeling, every thought, every sound comes back to, and from that home base, it's able to say, oh, well, that's good, and I want that there, and that's bad, and I don't want that. I want to push that away. We're being tricked every second by our marikpa, by our knowing wrongly. We're being tricked. So the world begins to appear in a way that it's not. That's what's illusory. It's not real. So we have dualistic vision. We see ourselves and the world as separate entities. Rather than seeing that the world we do, it's not that the world is within us. This is not mind-only type of school we're talking about. It's not that everything is my mind. It's that our mind is what recognizes all things. Our awareness is what experiences all things. Things exist. It's not nihilistic. It's not like, okay, like, I don't know, what was it? I think I've mentioned it once before. What was that? There was always that story about George Reeves. I watched that movie a while ago where he played Superman, and people said that he thought he was really Superman. He could jump out the window, this type of delusions are distortions. They're distorting our pure awareness. So when we talk about these things, we gain a little bit of understanding, a little bit of intellectual understanding, and it begins to loosen up these knots, and it begins to let things kind of flow freely again within ourselves. Our energies begin to flow a little more free. Because where do we hold our anger and hatred within ourselves? Where is the desire? Where does this cause all these blockages? And then, through our organs, and how does all this take place? All of a sudden, we begin to feel a little bit looser and open. But what really is needed then is to go inside and experience non-duality, experience pure awareness, experience who we really are. That's what makes the change. That's what makes the biggest change. Otherwise, when we think about it later, or somebody says something to us, we can't remember exactly because it's not our experience. If I tell you what Tibetan tea tastes like, that it's kind of like kind of black tea, and it's got kind of butter, and it's got kind of salt in it, and then you just have that intellectual understanding, that's not direct knowledge. When you taste the Tibetan tea, you have a direct experience. We need direct experience of emptiness. We can infer that, okay, because that this is made up of this cloth, and there's this wood here, and there's this and this and this and this put together, and that's what we call a particular table. But that can begin to loosen. But when we go deeper inside of ourselves and experience what it actually means, what emptiness actually means, and understand that everything exists, has both its relative existence, conventional existence, and absolute existence. Because its absolute existence is empty of any thingness making it what we think it is, it can become anything. Because our mind, our empty mind, which is the Dharmakaya mind, is within emptiness within ourselves, we can express it in any different way. That's why Buddhas express in many different ways, because the Dharmakaya, the Buddha mind, can express itself. Like I said to you, Lama Yeshe could be, he wasn't an actor that could just do one scene or two scenes. He could do anything because he comes from nowhere. He could act out anything because that knowledge of the empty nature of one's mind, of the Dharmakaya of the mind, is then able to express itself. Okay? This is what we strive for in the sense of to experience. This is what we want. That's why I said at the beginning, this is the wisdom that knows emptiness. It's not a philosophical idea any longer, but it knows it. So at that stage, as we're beginning to develop and that takes place, that's when we begin to see things like if there's a mirage, we don't veer off the road because we're driving into a little lake or into some water. We see it, but we don't believe it. When we're the magician that creates the magician show, we know there's not really a horse or an elephant there. It's just been conjured up through this magic. It's an illusion. And so we don't say, oh, I got to get out of the way from that horse or whatever, So at this stage, we still have dualistic vision. We still see things that way, but then we begin to not believe it. So we begin to loosen up, lose that particular hold on us. That's when, because that takes place, the object of anger is no longer so real. The object of desire is not that much real anymore. It doesn't have that same hold on us. It's not holding us and making us act and create out of that, because that's where all the actions take place. Our mind thinks something and we say something, we do something. And so this is where, when we're meditating, our meditation needs to be in that wisdom. And that wisdom is not outside, it's inside ourselves. So in the teachings, especially in the sutra teachings, it teaches us about shinne, the shamatha, mental quiet, mental calmness. We learn to find the nature of our mind of that calmness. But that's not the end of the path. Just becoming completely into mental calm, which also has many different, I'm not going to go into it, but developing that stage is very powerful, as it's something that's able to hold in you mental and physically. It's something different within ourselves as well. But from that quiet state, we need to arise our wisdom, because we're not being distracted any longer. We'll get into that quiet state, we get into the calm state, and we don't get distracted as much anymore. So that we be able to flow with the energy of the world as it takes place through our wisdom, through our rikpa wisdom, which arises and begins to work, begins to deal, with the world. So there's, a lot written on this. There's a lot of stuff to listen to on it. But the beauty is, the Buddha is within ourselves. The Guru, the wisdom is the Buddha inside of ourselves. We can find that within ourselves. We don't have to read every book that's in the library. We don't have to listen to every talk. Digest these and deal with this, and it's phenomenal what changes, can begin to take place. This is the key. This is the key. Becoming the wisdom, becoming the rikpa. So I think we need to kind of leave it there, because there might be some questions, and if not, there's not. But
yeah, I think you said this non-duality.
yeah,
Which today's talk was like at a high level of trying to understand.
yeah.
And if you can say what causes non-duality in all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, because I know, Buddhists like to talk about, like in Western things, they talk about things starting with the Big Bang theories and different things. So, the Buddhist concepts on some things need thinking about a little bit, because as we've talked before, our mind is not this static thing, but is this more like a stream. It's never stopping. There's a stream. So when we get into, especially into understanding of things like in, higher tantric practices, and then, tantra means like continuity, and then into things like dzogchen, where you talk about what is the mind. So the mind is not just empty. These objects are empty. This phenomena is empty, but this can't become enlightened. Because our mind's nature is empty, it also has some type of knowing, clarity, and it also has some type of continuous flowing energy, which is always going on. So in reality, in Buddhist terms, or especially in the higher ones, if we're sitting, in a sense, and we experience, and this is experience, we can experience wisdom, experience our emptiness. we're outside of what's actually samsara and nirvana in some regard. We're outside of that. But as soon as something happens and a thought begins to arise, because that's what we're made up of. We're made of, when we're watching our mind, we don't stick with one thought. The thought has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end, it sometimes has some space in between the next thought, but they go on and on and on and on. This type of continuity, once it comes up again, and we begin to create a story, create a commentary. Oh, look at that person. Oh, that looks like somebody I know. That looks like this, looks like that. And all these other things begin to come about. That's kind of the start of falling back into marikpa, falling back into ignorance. Grasping there is a me, and there is something out there. There's a person out there, and that person is actually beautiful, independently beautiful. So if somebody came down from another planet, and on that planet the beautiful people actually had 3 eyes and 2 or 4 arms, that beautiful person would not be absolutely beautiful. But we've conditioned ourselves. When we see that web of conditioning and we break that down, then we go beyond duality. Okay? So there's a term with beginningless time, because this process is goes on and on until we completely become Buddha.
Yeah, as you mentioned, when we see something, encounter something, we start to like, dislike, and today we like it, tomorrow dislike it, and it flips because we constantly focus on it, or it comes to us. So if you just accept as it is, whatever it is, I think these rhythms of duality cycles probably start easing out a little bit, and then you probably will be more.
Yeah,
It brings, if you do more and more, and every day or every second, you're a wise guy. But if you can do more,
yeah,
you probably get some.
Yeah, no, you're hitting the main point is that that it's not what tomorrow, it's not yesterday, but right now in the now. If we kind of just see things as they are, in a sense, without our painting on top of it, without home base sending out a message of what that is, and based upon who I am, then we're able to openly deal with the situation without, this complex. Hey, listen, the ego doesn't want to let that go. So the tricks are millions of them, millions of them, So that's why it's important to gain experience of it and recognize what is the intelligence, what is the nature of my mind, what is the nature of the world. That's what this is. That's what it's about. That's why Buddha came about, was to show you, wake up. Wake up. That's Buddha. Wake up. We wake up, from unconscious, from being asleep.
Thank you.
Yep.
And this waking up is kind of like, so we've talked about Rigpa, which is like our innate wisdom, which just arises by itself. It's not personal. It just comes up, right? I don't mean to interrupt you there, but Sure.
But what we need to understand is that that it's more understanding that, like, if you found a piece of gold and it was covered up with all kind of dirt and things on it, cleaning that dirt off didn't make that a gold, or didn't make that a diamond. The nature of that energy of that rock was gold or was a diamond. That's there. At all times, the true nature of our mind. There's a little. This gets into a little bit of a philosophical thing, because in the sutra teachings and even Mahayana teachings and things, and moving on, there's more discussion about the seed of Buddha. living within inside of ourselves. So the potential is inside of us. From the later stages, when you move into the Vajrayana practices, like we talked a little bit about the tantric practices, that you basically begin to take on the Buddha. You from your emptiness, you're basically are able to arise as Chenrezig or as Mahakala or whoever it might be, and you have that Vajra pride of it, and because that's who you are in a sense right there. And then of course once we begin to talk about further with Mahamudras and Dzogchen and things, that Rikpa is always there, part of ourself, and so that's always there to be felt, to be discovered.
Yes, okay, so we have this Rigpa, and I think you called it like Ma-Rigpa? Like
Ma-Rigpa, Ma is the negative to Rigpa,
right.
so that becomes not knowing.
Not knowing.
Instead of knowing is not knowing.
Right, so we have that going on, and then all the ego, you only mentioned one, which was pride, but there's very, very various ego things that we're grasping, self-cherishing, I, me, mine, all that.
Yeah, those are all based off of. It's all based off the root of them all is ignorance, which is knowing wrongly what we are or who we are. Okay, based off of that, then it branches off into anger, desire, pride, jealousy, and then we can get into many others. There's thousands and thousands of emotions that make up our being, which can only exist upon this stupid network. On this particular type of programming, which was wrong programming, right. a distorted program.
Right. So if we can use the term align ourselves with that Rigpa, or to drop I, me, mine, we have the various practices of whatever, being in the moment, meditation, yoga, yanta yoga, tai chi, anything. Right?
Yeah.
And then moment to moment, we're just trying to, or not trying, just allowing this vaster sense, self or no self or whatever it is, come forward, right?
Yes.
So I suppose what happens then, so my question is, how do we align ourselves throughout daily life, busy life, to that, moment to moment, without being on retreat for 3 years or something like that, right?
Yeah, so that's basically, so to begin with, that's why in the very earlier stages of practice, mindfulness is always important. If we're staying very mindful in our activity, with how are we eating, how we're cleaning the room, we're not allowing, this kind of energy. So there's energy. So when we do yantra yoga, when we do some of the breathing or do meditations, 9 breathing, clearing out the the channels and the chakras and things like this, all of those are all interrelated. It's a tight web. So we can go about. So that's where it's kind of interesting in the beauty of Tibetan Buddhism, because the beauty of Tibetan Buddhism is not saying that only sitting meditation is the path to awakening. So within the Tibetan, we can move on to the Vajrayana and Tantra, and so the chanting, the pujas, beginning to work with other kinds of energy, which is through our, through voice, through sound, through vibration. Okay, when we begin to do, some of the different yoga things, through the body, there's many ways. There's, that's why it goes back to that, great example of, the Buddha finding the one guy that he couldn't, it was not easy to teach intellectually. So he said, you need to go every day into the temple and you need to sweep the dirt and repeat, sweep the dirt and clean the dust, sweep the dirt, clean the dust. And all of a sudden, there became an awakening that the dirt was and dust was his mind, was the delusions on his mind that needed to be swept, not the dirt and the dust and they might have needed to clean that too, but that wasn't the purpose of that. So once you begin, and we also use other practices and things, that's why you move into Vajrayana, and you've not only you not only go into emptiness and dissolve all feelings of self, ego like this, ego grasping, and of the world around us, but you arise yourself as that deity, as that Buddha. That is the expression of your Dharmakaya, because it can do anything. So it's expressing itself into this form, in order to benefit others. And once it does that, our environment is our mandala. So depending on how our practices are going, when you're in those practices, then your food actually is nectar. When you're drinking, it's actually nectar, and it's actually purifying, it's actually healing. It has the power to heal you. That energy, that liquid itself, doesn't necessarily have power to heal, but when it's put together with wisdom, it has the ability to heal. Okay? So, in your everyday life, it's become movement within this particular, within that tantric deity. And then, as we move on in our practices, in a sense, not that we get there, not that I'm there or get there or anything, that's where once we've gone on, because even that, it becomes a kind of, has a basis of some kind of dualistic vision to it, in a sense, depending on our realization. But it's, me and that, in a sense. That's where in kind of Dzogchen or Mahamudra and things where then things become all of one taste. So there's not this and that any longer. And so, when you're dealing with the world, it's not because you have to see yourself necessarily as a Buddha, but you're not seeing yourself as not a Buddha. There becomes no more a conceptual. The conceptual mind has dissolved in that time. So every bit of all of our practices are to lead to these different things. So what do we do day by day? Day by day, we generate mindfulness, generate awareness of what we're doing. This will allow us to slow down. Once we slow down, we realize that, that favorite meal in front of us doesn't need to be devoured. And when it's devoured, we didn't enjoy it. We never tasted it. But all of a sudden, we slowly take that and we can see it, and it's coming up to... It's in our mouth, and we begin to taste it, begin to feel it. It becomes nectar. It begins to come down. Okay? We might not even want to finish that meal then, because we become so full from that, if we ever try that. We won't even be able to eat that much if you begin to eat really slow and become aware of what you're doing. So awareness is there. Become aware of what you're doing with your movement. No more unconscious. Don't be unconscious. Wake up.
Yeah, it seems like it's not just about, it's practicing all times. That's the only way to do it, because if you're not practicing all times, what are you sometimes practicing, sometimes in delusion?
Yeah.
And I suppose the other thing is getting really keen about your, when you're feeling anger, greed, trying to witness. So it's sort of like when we feel one with what we're talking about, then it's like the Tao, it flows, right?
Yeah.
But then when you're sort of hitting rocks in your life, you have to notice that and then return back to the ocean.
Yeah, and so ordinary wisdom, not necessarily just Rigpa wisdom, but just ordinary wisdom in a sense, begins to tell us how to deal. So there can become times when we're completely, like we hear from, all people and ourselves, we go into depression. What is depression? Our energy is down. The sunny day looks dark outside. Food doesn't taste, my favorite food there doesn't taste quite as good as it always does. And then I sit there and think, oh, well, that's just an illusion. That's like an illusion. I don't know, it's like an illusion. Well, that doesn't necessarily work. So we begin to work with our energy a little bit. We might need to be doing some breathing. We might need to be feeling, where are we holding some of that energy in our body? Okay? And when we begin to do that, we begin to release it from the energy level. Okay, that's why when we do some of these, I try to say, general way of us living in the West is we want to push through everything. Okay, so if I want to stretch and I want to be in this position, the position doesn't matter. It's getting into the position. It's the start of the position, the middle of the position, the end of the position, and wherever it is fine. But the funny thing is that if you actually look, if you sit there and you just stretch yourself, you feel where your body, inside your body, then the pervasive energy. Not the energy that's, talking about inside some of the other chakras, but through the channels, all the little channels throughout the entire body, the thousands of channels inside there have little blockages. So we feel a little bit of tightness over here, and a little bit of tightness over here, a little there. But the tightness is not as real as we think it is. So we actually are able to look at it a little bit, become aware of it, breathe a little bit with it, let the energy flow, and it becomes very funny how it can begin to release a little bit. So that's where inside some of these practices are, like the sutra path is beginning the path, and the path of like kind of renunciation. We renounce anger, hatred, all these. We don't do those things. We renounce samsara. The tantric path becomes the path of transformation. It's like alchemy. It's transforming everything, okay? And then they say once, and I can't tell you because I'm not Dzogchen master, but then within like Dzogchen and things, it's talking about self release. There's the ability to release that wisdom. That's all of a sudden the darkness that was in the room goes off when the light turns on. So there's different ways within this path, but the only way to get to them is to begin to work with ourselves.
Yeah, one video I watched just recently was very good one. I'll share it with you guys. He was a Tibetan master, and he said that everything is about wanting happiness in a way, even anger, greed. It's like the underlying thing is your desire for happiness. So when you see it that way, it sort of like softens it a little bit. It's like, oh, meaning you might get angry, but then why am I getting angry? Well, it's a desire for happiness. So then it's like actually a positive thing in a weird way, and then it sort of loosens it,
Yeah, well, that in the, as we talked a little bit, we didn't go into a lot of detail, but, within the Mahayana path, some of the practices and things there, those begin to use this kind of mind training. Okay, so it's beginning to reprogram yourself in a sense, so that that you begin to say that, okay, well, that person's doing that. Well, that's good because that's making me develop my patience. I'm just giving one example. So that I'm saying along the path, there are many levels of wisdom, and practices, that can change ourselves.
Yeah, I'm sorry to go on, but there's one I've been working with a lot. So like when I first, there's a lot of energies around here, different people.
Yeah.
So mostly scuzzy, like slam a door, you feel it, like you're meditating all of a sudden on your aura, right?
Yeah.
And before I get annoyed by it, and I ask Lama, what should I do about this? Don't worry about it. And I'm like, but Lama, it's something I feel like I could be like energizing and then like get knocked up by like a dark cloud. But then he kept telling me the same thing, like, what should I do? Don't worry about that. Don't, and for like years I was asking him. So then I said, well, I'm really sensitive. He goes, you're really sensitive. Your brain, nervous system, really sensitive. He's like, don't worry about it. But then I figured out a way to solve it myself, which is like, oh, the people around me are suffering and they're unhappy. That's why they feel that way. So then I started praying for them in my mind.
Beautiful.
Like, may they be released. Maybe I'm going to do chanting for them, for all of us, and like that thing that we're all in this together. And now I have more power over it. It's like it doesn't knock me out so much. Sometimes I still have to leave the apartment, go for a walk and breathe and swim or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's much better.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. There are different ways and different levels that can work for you. Eventually, like I said, when you're sitting with yourself within meditation, none of those things outside, none of those sounds, none of those things themselves can affect you except when you're living within that, this type of energy field that you've created. That's why when you sit and I say, just watch what arises. Once your mind begins to learn to not have to create some duality of good and bad, this and that outside there, it's just another thing that's happening. It has no better or no worse quality to it than what you give it. That's, that becomes, extremely, extremely powerful. So, yeah.
Got anything, Felix?
Dwell in your awareness.
What was that one? As avoid all evil doing. Well, I just read it yesterday. Avoid all evil doing. Cultivate virtue. Subdue the mind. That's
Yeah.
the Buddha way. Something more or less like that.
Yeah, that's the beginning of, that's very, very powerful, very difficult at the beginning of the path, basically, and that's why, the Dalai Lama says, my religion is kindness. And so, generate, if you try to generate good thoughts, for others. And, and it's very hard. That's why we went through some of these in the talk on, on the Mahayana path and the, the developing, bodhicitta in the, mind. Because when you understand that at first, you have to have some equanimity toward, what's outside there. But then if you can also begin to superimpose and sense how you feel in that situation. How about if it was your mother? Again, we're not going to go into that you have to necessarily have the ability to see all living beings as your mother, which is what, Tibetans will tell you. It actually is. We've had so many numerous lifetimes, but you don't have to do it that way. Because then, of course, the intellectual mind will sit there and say, well, what do I care? I don't remember those other lives. So anyway, so there's always some game that can go on. But the ability to be able to, generate kindness is always existent. What's that key? What's the key for you? There's going to be different keys along the way. Some things that you hear today might have very little effect today, but in 3 years,
Yeah, for me, I almost have the opposite delusion. Like when I think about all the kalpas, millions of kalpas that the Buddha had to go through to gain enlightenment, if that's our actual, what we're here to be doing, it makes you look very differently at your life, almost like, well, everyone's wasting it. We should be like really deeply enjoying each other and being kind and helping each other in this really communal way, but we're not like that at all, right?
No, well, that's it. I mean, we basically were controlled by our karma. So we need to understand that our karma is not permanent. Karma doesn't exist either in an absolute fashion. Its nature is emptiness. Its relative nature is true. That's why you have to have right conduct. You have to do things in the right way, because otherwise you continue to create negative karma. But that karma is dissolvable. Same thing with our view. We need to, our view needs to purify in a sense, so we begin to get pure view, closer to a tantric practice would be maybe. So. Okay. All right.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Very